This episode of Saturday Morning Trek is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and to help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the non-profit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org. And if you want to join the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode, join the Babel Conference, our listener group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field. We look forward to seeing you there.
This is Walter Koenig, Chekhov from Star Trek, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Farrah Fawcett Majors guest stars on the $6 Million Man.
Now you can play Star Trek with a Star Treculator, a digital calculator that never makes a mistake.
Ceremony, called the Space Shuttle, the key to man's future in space. This is a machine that can fly in space and land on runways like an airplane.
Welcome to Saturday Morning Trek Supplemental Number 2. I'm Aaron Harvey, and Adam is recovering from an epic Star Trek Las Vegas. Today we're going to leave the world of the 1970s behind for a moment, a time when you could walk right up to the door at Comic-Con and buy a ticket day of, and take a peek behind the curtain at Star Trek podcasting. I was extremely honored to represent Trek FM at friend of the network Larry Nemecek's panel, Your Star Trek Podcast HQ SoCal Edition. I was joined by Kayla Acavino from Trek Movies Shuttlepod Podcast, Lisa Getzko from Trek Radio, and Mission Log's John Champion sporting a rakishly torn Captain Kirk outfit. We discussed the state of Star Trek podcasting from a uniquely Southern California perspective, what the role of podcasts and internet radio play in keeping fan interest up during the fallow times, and what we can expect from podcasts with Trek finally back in series format. And as you listen, you'll be in the enviable position of not having to have hiked around a hot and humid convention center for half the day before collapsing into your chair to listen to us.
Scotty, beam us down to the El Cortez Hotel in San Diego.
Why are we going there, sir?
To get a vacation from all these tribbles. Besides, we'll be able to see lots of science fiction, fantasy, horror movies, Star Trek shows, celebrities. What more can anyone want?
So, without further ado, I give you Dr. Trek himself, Larry Nemecek.
My name is Larry Nemecek, and this is a panel that we had an idea for last year for the 50th, which was not picked up, but I hear they have just a dearth of Star Trek material this year here. So we're glad to be here. I know. Anyway, my name is Larry Nemecek, or Dr. Trek to some of you that fall for marketing, and very proud to do this. Apparently, I thought there wasn't a lot of podcasting material here, especially when it overlaps with Star Trek. So we're really thrilled to bring this to, because we have some of the top national, the top Trek best known are either done or created or headquartered here in Southern California, which makes sense since we're so close to Hollywood. Here's the Army o logos. So I have Larry Nemecek's Trekland Online. It's everything I do there. My recent business for fan experiences, Portal 47. I've been doing some unorthodox podcasting. I started doing a 10-minute live. I guest on many of them. But Trekland Tuesdays Live is on at 1 p.m. Pacific every Tuesday now. Live on Facebook. And that's it. And that's where you can get a hold of me. Then next to my left here, I will do this. Go for it, Kayla.
All right. Hey, everyone. I'm Kayla Iacovino. Co-host of the Shuttlepod podcast, which is the podcast of TrekMovie.com. And we talk about all kinds of things on the podcast, from newsy stuff, stuff that we cover on TrekMovie.com, to deep dives into some of the movies and episodes and our favorite characters, favorite weird subjects that we can think of to talk about. So pretty much everything. It's a fun one, though.
And then to her left is
I'm Aaron Harvey, and I am the producer and co-host of Saturday Morning Trek, which is Trek Movies animated series podcast, plus all things Trek in the 1970s. And we do a lot of the deep dives. We've interviewed some people from Filmation, which has been fun. We've sort of busted some myths about the color pink, which is it's like pink tribbles were not because the art director was colorblind. That was just sort of a fun story that was put to kind of cover up the fact that the person who did color them wasn't really caring anymore and just said, sure, fine, pink, whatever.
It was Filmation. What do you expect?
It was film. Well, yeah, that's not fair. But so we've been doing that. In the summer, we've been doing a lot of kind of rewatches. We're inviting other people from the network to join me and one of my co-hosts and just listen along and watch an episode without kind of going too deep into it and just like kind of a more mystery science theater kind of fun reaction.
And I have The Edge up here real quick.
Oh, yeah. And we've also just launched our Star Trek Discovery podcast, The Edge. So it's the...
And you're like a group of 4 that rotate around.
Yeah, it's sort of like, if you're familiar with Trek FM, it's sort of like the Ready Room, but with Discovery as the main topic. So we have 4 hosts that rotate, and then we're bringing other people in from the network, so everybody gets a chance to kind of test it out and try it out and get different voices, which I think is really important, especially with... It's a new show, and we're going from kind of looking at all old Star Trek to this new thing that's coming out weekly, and
We're going to get into that, what that dynamic's like. But to your left, I want to make sure and introduce the lovely Lisa. Tell us about yourself, Lisa, because you are, and tell us about the slightly different slant that you have as a network.
Yes, I know. Despite the fact that a lot of people like to use the word radio when they're talking about a podcast, when Trek Radio uses the word radio, we are actually an internet radio network. So we've been around. Just last month, we celebrated our 7-year anniversary. God, I can't believe it's been 7 years.
And I have trekradio.net up there.
You can talk to me afterwards if you want to know the joke.
No, it's no joke. Pay no attention to other Trek radios out there. There is only one.
And I'm the Chief Operations Officer. I kind of stumbled into this through my experience just in broadcasting and management. So don't ask me a Star Trek trivia question, but we are the internet's first radio network dedicated to the sci-fi community.
And you have live DJs as well.
We have live DJs. We have pre-recorded podcasts. We have live podcasts. We cover events like Comic-Con and other conventions, who shall not be named. And we do interviews with celebrities. It's a little bit of everything. It's kind of like sharing the creativity of our friends with the listeners, all in one spot.
Well, speaking of friends, I'm really getting pissed at John because he was here a minute ago, and he's not here. I have his slide and everything. And, okay.
Sorry, I just beamed in, and I tell you, Act 3 of any episode is a bitch.
Okay.
You end up like this, and but I'm glad to be here, Larry. Very glad to be here.
That's some entrance, even for a library, John.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we had to liven
That's
it up.
awesome. Well, get a breath.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, get some Triox.
Okay. Good.
And
right here. Thank you.
Tell us about what the hell you doing here.
All right. So I'm the
host. If you need help,
host.
You can turn around and look on the back.
Oh, yeah, there it is. So Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I am producer and co-host of that show. We've been at it 5 years as of first week of August, so in a couple of weeks. And around that time, we'll hit our 8 millionth download. So it's kind of cranking along. We're doing all right.
Awesome. And recently the network has expanded.
Yeah. So under the Roddenberry name, we're just in the birth stages of the Roddenberry Podcast Network, where we've teamed up with a couple of other great shows, Priority One and Women at Warp. And we felt like they served a need that we certainly weren't doing on Mission Log, because we're not a news show, and even though I do trivia, we're not a trivia show. We're solely dedicated to talking about morals, meanings, philosophy, ethics of Star Trek. And by bringing in Priority One, that kind of covers the news angle and certainly a heavy emphasis on gaming. And by having Women at Warp, that filled an angle that was specifically about feminist critique of Star Trek, which we felt like was an important voice to have. And we're glad to share the name Roddenberry with them, and glad to have their names associated with us.
Yeah. So in the group here, I mean, I have come from a big background and lately focusing on live and interactive experiences with people. Kayla, you've got the huge Trek movie background behind you. Why don't I just go to the big group one there? Yay. The Trek FM network has a zillion different podcasts in it that have all come from Chris Jones's mind. You have a whole network, as you were talking about, and Roddenberry's got the Roddenberry name, and Mission Log was kind of the flagship, and now you're expanding out from that with all that.
It's important to point out that, from the beginning, we felt like, all right, well, why another Star Trek podcast? There are a lot of them out there. Well, why not? Everybody has a unique voice. There's a lot to be said about 50 years of history and different angles you can take on Star Trek. And we never, ever felt like we were in competition with anybody to do that. Trek FM has a fantastic stable of shows that all fill very specific niche needs for their audience. And we thought, well, cool, let's see how much more we can expand and how much more programming we can bring.
But there's not incestuously, but there's a lot of overlap, and people do put like Mission Log is on Trek FM.
Yeah, Mission Log is on Trek FM. Mission Log is on Trek Movie, and we end every show by promoting those. Yeah, and Trek Radio.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to stop prompting everybody, and just if you don't jump up there, I'm gonna, So good deal, Lisa. So just out of curiosity in the audience, is there anyone that has never listened to of any kind of a podcast? I know this is hard to believe, but there are podcasts about things beyond Star Trek, politics and sports and things. Oh, okay. Well, because I was curious. I was just curious to see what kind of an audience we would get if we had some non-podcasters get yanked in, or podcast downloaders, because that's always curious. So let me just let me ask the question: is there anybody that may have listened to podcasts of whatever subject, but have never listened to any of the ones that we've got represented up here? It's okay. I'm just curious. Just taking marketing. Okay. Well, here's our chance to do it. Because the first thing I was going to say was, did anybody on the panel do this on any other of these topics before you did a Trek one? You had a career in broadcasting, Lisa, but I mean, not these specified produced podcasty type things, which have come around the last 10, 15 years.
Right. No, I got into it the last 7 years. Yeah. In terms of podcasting on the internet.
Well, John mentioned this too. One of the things, there are a lot of podcasts out there. It's almost like, well, it's not quite like fan films, which are not going away. But there is that concern. I think anybody that has cares about the audience and is very aware of the Trek landscape is cognizant of not trying to just do what somebody else is doing. I mean, everybody's putting their own slant on it, or they're bringing the resources they already have to bear, or whatever, I think. Is there anything, here's the thing, is there anything particularly difficult about doing a podcast about Star Trek? And here's the thing. We've been in 12 years of fallow times, right? And now we have a show cranking up. Is that conjuring up any... It's exciting, but it's also, we've got the CBS and licensing side ramping up a little bit. Has anybody bumped into any legal issues with the franchisee? And or there other things? That was a bad time. And is anybody seeing a challenge as well as the excitement of having a live show finally for the first time in the era of podcasting and social media?
There's a lot of questions in there. I think I have a lot of answers for various questions.
Joe, go.
I think for one thing, jumping in what you're saying about this idea that we're changing from a time when Trek has been at its nadir, it's been at, we haven't had a lot of activity. There's been the JJ shows, but they've been few and far between. It's not something we can keep up with like a television show. And it's surprising to me how it's not difficult at all, I think, to have so many Star Trek podcasts. Like, even as a fan, I think I'm surprised. We just all the podcasts we've named, and there are more, how they all exist, and they really don't step on each other's toes. Yeah. And you come up with ideas of things to talk about that people haven't talked about before, which is kind of surprising, but I think it speaks to how big the Trek universe is. But now I think, especially being with Trek Movie, who's the website that my podcast is underneath, we're foremost a news site. And so with Discovery coming, I think we're definitely having, we're going to see shifts in the things that we sort of have to cover, you know what I mean, that fall under our news directive. And the idea of maybe spinning off other podcasts to cover that. So I think that's an entirely different kind of a show, but it's just as exciting, I think.
And I think one of the challenges of that is, except for maybe John, I don't think any of us do this on like a fully professional 24-hour basis. Or that's true. that, for Kayla and I, it's like, we have regular jobs that we're trying to do at the same time. And it's just like, why did this have to come out now? Because I don't have time to write up a story and then record it. So it
takes a village.
It's a balance. But and having
it doesn't make itself.
Starbase.
No, it doesn't make
it takes a village.
And it doesn't edit itself either, which is really frustrating. But, even Trek Movie and Trek FM share stuff back and forth because it's just, I don't think we could do it otherwise.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, Larry used the word incestuous. A lot of Trek FM
true.
In the
podcasts,
best way.
In the best way.
I said that too. I
Right.
said in the best way.
Best way. A lot of Trek FM podcasts. We play them on Trek Radio, and to go back to your statement about kind of how it's changed, maybe over the last 10, 15 years, is 7 years ago when we started. We really just wanted to create that hub where all of our talented friends could show off their fanaticism for Star Trek, for sci-fi, and it's now there's more than I can count. There was a few back then, and it's grown tenfold just over the last few years.
Trek FM
I would think
on your network or your radio first. The podcast.
I was just,
Yes, we love you
I
guys.
think the number and the quality. It's like a lot of anything that's come along. Kind of like the fan films in a way, only a lot more in number. There were only so
more
many
varied
fan
entry.
films, but there's mom and pop in the backyard podcasts,
Sure.
or in the garage, literally maybe, and then some of the most everybody's here are like really well produced, slickola things that compete. Would compete with anything. Does anybody have a sense for how the world of Trek podcasting compares, maybe not with like politics and sports shows even, but with the other genres like Star Wars? I haven't sat down to see how many podcasts of Star Wars there are, or for Marvel or DC
There's
or
three.
name.
There's three.
But they're big ones.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they're really big.
It's funny you say that because we did a couple years back tried to start a second channel that was Holonet Radio, and there are like millions of Star Wars podcasts, but they don't, other than the three big ones, because I know who you're talking about, other than the three big ones, but they don't do things regularly.
Yeah.
They'll like be quiet for a couple of years, and then they're excited right now with all the movement around Disney and the new films and things like that. In fact, last weekend, D23. But for a lot of lean years there wasn't a lot of consistency. So it's with Star Trek, there was, even in the lean years, there was that consistency in podcasts.
Isn't it funny how once again Star Wars is making so much noise over a few hours of actual?
Don't make me choose.
But it's funny because both of you have touched on this, how in the leaner years of Trek is when podcasting came to being a thing, and then had even a resurgence. And even though we're super lean right now, leaving that area now, but we've been super lean on Trek, that's when all these Trek podcasts grew up. I think that just speaks a lot, I think, to
and that's
Star
when you
Trek.
get back to Larry asked about legality or legal issues, is now that there is such a spotlight again, not that it ever left, on Star Trek, there is kind of...
Lawyers
are
suddenly looking at things.
You gotta walk lightly.
There's more than one angle to the concept of we've been in fallow times and now we're not, and things get ratcheted up, and some things get a little tenser.
Yeah.
I think maybe in a year or two it'll ease up a bit. There are a lot of people that are not used to running around dealing with Star Trek in a legal, real way, where the world has been keeping it. And I'm not needing to ignore the JJ movies, but they are. A movie is a totally separate thing. It's just 2 hours. It's like a Star Wars podcast. It's just 2 hours that shows up every 3 or 4 years, where a series, you're cranking it out and people are talking 24/7. Well, here's a take. How did, I think everybody here, if not at present at the dawn of the creation, was in there close by early on, about forming and starting and even funding in some way, keeping it going, where it's not a hobby. Because I think some of those podcasts that come and go are just when people can sit down and get off work and not put the kids to bed or whatever. Anybody have a thought on it's a variety of things there too. Patreon, or it's just people are just doing it out of their pockets, or what's the range here?
Yeah, I mean, we were lucky that Mission Log was created by Rod Roddenberry, so he wanted this show to happen, and he could make it happen. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that just there's this infinite source of money to keep the show going. That's not fair to anybody, you know. So we knew that we had to treat it like a business, and we knew that we had certain goals that we wanted to make. We also knew from the beginning that our real measure of success was going to be about engagement, getting the audience to talk back to us, and then carrying on a conversation with them. So that was first and foremost. And it took a few years before we were in a position that we knew we could get advertisers and rely on that a little bit. And then we launched Patreon. We're kind of late starting up Patreon. We had kicked that around for a while.
Latreon?
But we weren't really sure how that would sound. You know, 5 years ago it was one thing, and we thought, well, do we sound like we're begging if we use Patreon? Or a lot of places before Patreon would have a PayPal donate link. We thought, are people really going to do that? Let's just sort of hold off. Let's wait. I think Patreon now is perceived very differently, because you have big names behind Patreon that are, or you know, participating in Patreon, that are doing really well. You know, people who honestly don't need it at all. But if it allows them to be creative, if it allows them to make more content, fantastic. So I would like to be in a position where we don't have to do that, but it's nice that it's sort of a thing that is, we treat it almost like an exclusive club for our listeners. You know, we know we have X number of listeners, but if there's a little sliver out of that really wants to do Patreon, that we want to thank them, we have little premiums for them, and, you know, it's not really about that, but it's just sort of another way to be tied to the listener at that point.
They're flying in economy plus.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, and I have to say some of that has really come from the development of crowdsourcing. That
it is something how social media and podcasting and crowdsourcing, these are all in the mix, and they've all just been around the last, not to cut you off, but the last 8 or 10 years. It's all been kind of an interesting mix that 20 years ago, or, you know,
well, we saw it last year at San Diego Comic-Con. They had, you know, over a dozen panels just on crowdsourcing alone. So it became, and like you said, with Patreon, with having a couple of big names behind it, kind of lending credibility to it, whether they need it or not. I think the same thing has happened with several crowdsourcing companies, that having some other, what would be perceived as, okay, famous stars who don't need the money. Well, just because they're famous doesn't mean someone's going to write them a check, you know, for $1 million. Yeah, go make this movie. You know, the idea of independent film became a little bit more acceptable. So the PayPal donation, the Patreon, the crowdsourcing, just in the last few years has become a great way to support independent arts.
Oh, Mystery Science Theater came back, you know, from Netflix.
Yeah. Right. And talking about things like, you know, the social media and podcasts and all these other things, ways that we digest Trek and the ways that we interact with it, that's never existed before when there's been a television show on the air. So Discovery is the first show ever in Star Trek history.
Of the modern era.
Of the modern era. You know, and it's huge because with a show that has such a fan base like Trek, like it's always been a fan base that has a community, they talk to each other, they go to conventions. So that community's always been there, but now it's so much more accessible. And it's like that level to entry into the Trekkie world is
well, it's like, is it today that Chris Hardwick is in H? Yeah? Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Let's all head over there.
Chris Hardwick started out that way, where he just wanted to sit around with his friends and talk about
stuff he likes.
Yeah, and talk about the stuff that he likes and that he's passionate about. And so many people, I've heard him say this from his mouth, so many people told him, oh, yeah, that's a lame idea. You're going to talk about a show right after they've watched the show?
Right.
And some of the same people that criticized him are now doing their own talking whatever. Yeah. Won't name any names. He already did on his show. You know, so it's become more accepted, this whole idea of a dialogue.
Well, an awful lot of things are more accepted now than
it's kind of like Starlog magazine come to life in hyperactive mode or something like that.
And Starlog was laughed at in its day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really? magazine just about sci-fi. Really? Okay.
Well,
It's
he
not
came from
lit.
the
imagine.
world of soap opera magazines, which is exactly the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like, why would you want a magazine just for soap operas? And I was
Yeah.
like,
Well, and one thing here that's, as far as everybody's individual shows, and some people are representing more than one show, when we say a podcast, now a podcast can be several different formats. We could have just like, and we touched on this, but we can have just plain news, analysis, and people sitting around and analyzing something and talking. And then we have, like interview shows, which, I mean, I have a video channel that I do interviewing on, and some people have a mix. Anybody have I want to at least at some point today get your like A1, if you died tomorrow, what you hope your archive what would be on your,
Why are you
what
looking at
moment
me?
you achieved.
Why are you looking at me?
What moment you achieved behind a mic that you're most proud of? Or maybe that was the wacky doodlist.
I think they're still to come. Can I say that? Can I?
You-
is that
you
a
just
total
did.
cop-out answer? See, that way people.
We
will
can
keep
edit that
listening.
out. We can take that out. No.
I think, Larry, what you're talking about is something that's sort of a fundamental thing about podcasting anyway, which is to say that there are a lot of different shows with a lot of different topics and a lot of different hosts. The best thing that you can do is be an inch wide and a mile deep. So I know a lot of people who say, well, I want to start a podcast because I'm a funny guy and I like to talk to my friends. All right. Good luck finding an audience, But if you're a funny guy and you like to talk to your friends about something that you're passionate about, that you have a unique take on, that you can then go find that audience and nurture that audience, then you've actually got a show. And that's why Star Trek podcasting works across the breadth of the internet, reaching this huge collection of fans from all different walks of life, because everybody on this panel does something very unique, and they have a specialty, and they have a passion with a particular voice for their individual topic. So, Ken and I do one thing, and we crafted that from the very beginning to say, all right, here's what we want to pick apart about Star Trek. And we have to remind listeners every now and then, particularly if they're new, oh, well, you missed this thing. Well, it's not that we missed it, it's we didn't care about that thing. But here are 10 other podcasts that care about that thing that you really want to talk about and be engaged about. So I think that just applies across the board, no matter what, whether it's a Trek show or a science show or a Star Wars show for the three of them, But as far as what I'm proud of, I mentioned at the Roddenberry panel that we've done enough shows now where it's very easy to forget the great moments that we've had, But there are moments where Ken and I might be very much on the same page about something, but we're both equally passionate about that thing. And we submitted to the Parsec Awards this year our show on The Outcast, because it not only is a great episode of TNG, but in our mission to figure out what's relevant today, we were both angry that that show is relevant today, because it shouldn't be a thing, When that show came out, sure.
Which took the whole gender differences, diversity, prejudice thing in a science fiction Star Trek angle. Right.
Yeah. And it was handled brilliantly in Star Trek, and it has this kind of tragic ending to it that should make the audience upset. And it made us upset that it was a thing then and that it still had relevance today. So those are the moments that I like, is when we get really fired up about something. And we got a lot of good feedback on that one. Fortunately, most of it positive. I'm glad to say, because there is negative feedback too, but we take it in stride.
Well, and I think it's because, in its essence, Star Trek is about the human condition. Yes, there's aliens, there's space, there's technology, but it's about people. Mm-hmm. And that's why you can, after 50 years, continue to talk about it every single week.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that the podcast? I mean, I still go to conventions, and if I have like 200 people in a room, and do you do this? Do you do this? And I still see a very small percentage of fans that are downloading podcasts. What's everybody doing? Do you just see a gradual penetration through social media and word of mouth, or what are you doing to build audiences? And do you think what's the trend?
What I like to do at a convention is take somebody's phone out of their hands and say, do you download Mission Log? No, here. Now you're subscribed. Enjoy. Seriously, I mean, we will do that because there are people who don't know what podcasts are, and there are people who own a smartphone and don't realize that they can do this. And I'll gladly say, look, you should listen to a ton of shows, but subscribe to this one too.
That's how you got to 8 million downloads.
Exactly. Yeah, 8 million phones.
And you wore
Around
that
the
shirt
room, grabbing
each
his
time.
phone.
Exactly.
We make sure that we share everything as much as we can on social media, like Instagram, even just like, having the links, just places that you wouldn't, like, oh, I don't go to a podcast, I don't go look at, pictures of cats and stuff like that to find a podcast. But if you have the link there and it takes you back, and sometimes you can watch it or listen to it online as opposed to downloading it directly, and I don't really know what that does for the numbers.
Nope, same
thing. Okay.
If they're feeding from the RSS feed,
right,
yeah.
So we've had a lot of people, say that they listen to it just by pushing the button on the page or something like that. So,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that's the main importance of something like TrekRadio.net, is that we like promoting each other. Mm-hmm. We like promoting our friends. I know there's a TNG Improv event tonight, and we were talking about that.
Yeah, there they are.
We were talking about that on Trek Radio. We talk about when you guys come out with new episodes, because we want people to find you through us, find you through, iTunes. I'm in my head kind of going, should I mention names? Yeah. Find you through all different ways. Find you through Trek Movie, through roddenberry.com, and just promoting each other, because it's the entertainment industry. So, you got to be able to reach across the aisle, right?
It's a very Trek mythos, isn't it, right? Like IDSC, we're all friends here, guys. A very TNG era mythos.
Well, and being in
especially
Southern
right now
California, too. Being in Southern California, we also have sort of like, it's easier for us to all kind of work together to find those people who are also kind of in Los Angeles.
I was going to
still.
get to
that. Is true.
Yeah.
Geography
the
does
reason
help.
That's the
Yeah,
reason
it's
I called this SoCal, is because the cool thing about podcasting and a lot of things now digitally with the internet is that people can do it wherever they are. They can be in Slaughterville, Oklahoma, and do this if they want. There's decent Wi-Fi.
Yeah, we have a guy in Dubai right now. One of our co-hosts is in business school in Dubai. So,
but there is something special about physically the folks that are here. Now, I don't know if there's going to be this big podcast community spring up in Toronto now or not, but for 6 months a year, like Winter Birds or something. But there is an access point to that. And those of us who dally in or use interviews, although, phones are phones. And I heard this rumor that podcasting is mostly audio. So there is that. But yeah, has anybody expressly had a positivity from the fact that we're here? We're here because we're here. It's not like people moved here to do their Trek podcast in LA. But has anyone got any great moments from that, or being able to?
We've experienced both. Our chief financial officer's in Australia, and I've never been there, but I can talk to him through the internet, and he can help support our network that way when we've never met each other in person. But on the opposite side, being in Southern California, there's so many different events that we have access to. It allows for a level of creativity I may not get if I'm somewhere where I don't have access to that. But when you ask about memorable moments, I remember, help me out, because I can't remember how many years ago it was, we did a live broadcast for Halloween. There are several sci-fi/Star Trek bands. And this happened to be, this particular year, it was Warp 11 was playing on a Friday up in Sacramento, and Sci-Fried was playing on a Saturday in Florida, and I just so happened to have staff members, DJs, that could be in both of those locations. So we broadcast them live.
That's really
and
cool.
we got...
Coast to coast.
Yeah, and we got...
Radio coast to
actually,
coast.
around the world. And we got emails from so many people that said, I love this band. I've never been able to see them live because they can't fly out here or they can't go to the conventions. And they're like, thank you so much, because I've never heard them live. And live, we had to do it during mature content hours, if you know those bands, especially Kiki. She loves the F word. But yeah, they love the aspect of live, the interactivity of it. Yeah. So that was one of our memorable moments in terms of...
Wow, is it time for Q&A yet? I think this just might be. We have a news announcement to make at the end of this panel. Which did it get made earlier?
It did.
At another place?
Okay. in a little bit of detail, but we can talk more detail.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the real deal. I wasn't there, so
Yes.
it obviously didn't really happen.
I called you the late Larry Nemeczek. I hope you're okay with that.
Good. That'll get them wagging. I wonder if that guy from Starfleet Intelligence will be there blogging that I died, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, bloggers. Do we have any questions? Anything?
He needs to blog that you've died. You're not somebody until the internet has said you're dead.
Right. I should have done some paintings.
I put it on TMZ.
I did, yeah.
You got a question, Larry?
Oh,
I believe
yes.
we have a question from the yellow
I'm
shirt.
sorry. We have a mic stand here. I didn't mean to throw you.
We have to capture this.
I didn't mean to throw you with unexpected situations. Okay. You could improv fans at a Q&A line.
Hello. We'll do a scene for you.
Yeah. Okay.
Perfect. My name is Sarah. This is Jess.
Hello.
We're from the Improvised Generation. Thank you for shouting us out. And my question for you
You're
is,
welcome.
Yes, thank you, Larry.
Yeah, the thank you does go to Larry. He's the one that told us.
Oh, I know.
It's exciting to be around a lot of nerds that like it as much as we do.
Yes.
I mean, nerds lovingly. I'm
Yes.
going to sit down now.
My question for you all is, as a fellow fan who's a lifelong fan, have you ever hit a moment where you ran out of something to talk about?
Right
Fandom
now?
block.
Yeah, I think,
Passion block.
or is it? Do you just have this eternal flow of ideas and fresh material that you are looking to produce? I'm just curious. I'm not trying to tell you don't have ideas.
I think writer's block hits everyone at some
Yeah.
point, but the way that I can get out of it in about 2 seconds by going to my other friends who either write for Trek Movie or work on the podcast and just be like, what are you guys thinking about lately? And they'll have like 20 ideas, and then we'll talk about the first one for an hour, So I think everyone has, you can go to each other in those times where you're like, I'm just like all out of ideas right now. Because the community is pretty creative and vibrant. It's easy to find people like that in the Trek community, I think.
Yeah, that's what we've looked at with Trek FM, where I've stumbled across a couple episodes which are like, I mean, they're not bad. They're just like, what do you say about it? And so you grab somebody who has a different viewpoint or something, and it turns into a conversation. It might be a conversation about one character that has 4 seconds of dialogue, but at least you've sort of then filled out that time period.
Does Trek have any of those?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, we have an entire
620.
episode on Ursinoids, so from Mud's Passion, because that's about all anybody wanted to talk
your
about.
Your entire podcast is about Star Trek the animated series.
Yeah.
Like, talk about niche.
Yeah, when somebody asked me, it's like, oh, do you worry about stepping over? I'm like, no, not at all, because no one wants to do this.
Well,
and you haven't run out of stuff to talk about.
No, I mean, we're just finishing season 1, and then season 2 is 6 episodes, so it's shorter. But we really have lucked out and be able to find people who worked on the show, and those people never get asked to be talked to.
Yeah.
So we really
your
want
interview with the animator. What was his name?
Bob Klein.
Bob Klein. I was like, oh my God, why has no one thought to find those people?
He
yet?
designed the first non-Constitution class starship ever for Star Trek, and like, why hasn't anybody talked to him about it? So.
Well, and with companies like Netflix bringing back or, revitalizing old animated series, you now have other people going, oh, wait, what you did, that's kind of a good idea. Maybe I'll do that for Voltron or,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, the genius thing you did, though, Aaron, was not just, because I was like, well, that'll be 24, 26 episodes, then bang. But you say Saturday Morning Trek and the 70s.
You're right.
Fandom, which was the revival decade.
So we've talked about Starlog Magazine and all sorts of stuff.
Right, and the rise of conventions and zines and all that.
So this might be a little too inside baseball, but...
Not with this crowd.
So, yeah, right. So Ken and I are in a very bad habit right now of recording our shows on like a Tuesday night before they're due on a Thursday morning.
None of the rest of us do that.
Yeah. We at one point we were about 8 weeks ahead, which was awesome.
Wow.
It's been a very long time. Yeah. And typically what will happen is like on a Sunday evening, I'll text Ken and say, oh, I can't do this. Oh, this is awful. I've got nothing to say about this episode. And we'll kind of go back and forth a little bit, and it's like, well, what about this particularly terrible thing? Or what about this particularly awful thing to talk about? So we'll kind of make light of it, which some of our audience hates, but we try to warn them that we just sort of have to decompress sometimes. Like our show, it can't always be serious, it can't always be about heavy social issues. But then that usually gives us an entry point to get into something that is topical.
And whatever episode you pick is going to be somebody's either favorite episode or least favorite episode.
Yeah. Here. Aaron actually designed a beautiful Aquiel tattoo for me, which will never, ever see the light of day. Certainly not on my body.
Are you saying because of where it is?
Are you saying that it's not where the shirt is ripped? Are you saying that you've got feedback that they were opposed to humor, or they were opposed to they were just very straight arrow and didn't like you finding fault with something, even if it was like a tiny little thing about being negative, quote unquote, or critiquing it? And they were like, how can you find anything negative about this Star Trek?
You're doing something right when you get email from people saying, you're pushing your liberal agenda, or you're too conservative about this, or you're making too much fun of this, or God, don't you guys ever lighten up on this thing? It's just meant to be a joke. Or just every end of the spectrum, we get email about all of that. So you're pushing somebody's buttons, even as nicely as you try to present something. We try. In fact, I just got an email today from somebody saying it was in Descent Part 2, and we were talking about political realities and how that episode shows this character that is a strong man promising things to people, and
Lors Borgs.
Pardon?
Lors Borgs.
Lors Borgs.
Yeah,
yes,
say that 3 times fast.
And we were very careful to not tie that into political specifics. We were talking about general ideas here. And somebody wrote in and said, "Thank you for doing that." And I said, "Look, there's a very good reason, because one, we're not trying to turn the audience off from the message. The message is more important, right? And the other thing is, we want the show to go on and on and on. We want this show to be relevant 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And it's not just about this thing that happened in the news yesterday. It's about big ideas that influence political tides."
Well, and for some strange reason, maybe the fact that people are still, even the original series, are finding their way to the show, it's speaking to them. If it's not about Vietnam or overpopulation, but all the issues that they tackled in subtext are still finding resonance today. And sadly, war hasn't gone away, hunger hasn't gone away, social injustice hasn't gone away. But when it's not about a specific identifiable thing.
Well, and sometimes I think you can find conversation in the negativity. You were talking about, this one particular episode, you're like, oh, I don't want to do this. You can't hide that from your audience, because there's probably somebody out there that's just like, yeah, I got nothing to say about that episode either. You have to be honest with them about, I don't like it. Because then in that negativity, there's that conversation, that dialogue back and forth. It's making me think of recently, we actually tweeted a photo that came from someone working on the new series of I'm going to get dirty looks from my resident Klingon, of the new Klingons. We got so much negativity for that. People just emailing us, getting all kinds of hate mail.
It gets old.
How could you? How could you? You've ruined
the
Discovery
messenger.
for me.
We're just the messenger.
I'm canceling my, all access account. And I'm just like, what?
Sure you are.
No, seriously. They're like, how could you tweet that? I'm like, it's coming from CBS. You've ruined it. You've spoiled it. It's coming from their press room. It's like, don't get me.
Oh, you mean that it was spoilers?
Yes, they were saying we killed it.
Wow.
Killed it for them.
Not what
I
it
thought
was,
saying
the
that they
fact
didn't
you
like
leaked
it.
The fact that we leaked it.
That's hilarious.
Okay.
And then I don't know what it was, because it got picked up by the Nerdist, it got picked up by Screen Rant, and our email just started, David and I, our email just started blowing up, and we're like,
oh, I know what you're talking about, the photo that one of the extras took, and then the extra
and
was fired.
Just wait a couple days, folks. You're going to see them on the other stage. Those very same Klingons.
It's like the year that I said that CBS and Netflix had made a deal for a new Star Trek. Mr. Starfleet Intelligence blogger in Phoenix that year that said, I was saying it would be stupid for Netflix not to be trying to talk to CBS and Paramount about doing...
He left out a few words.
And he said that I announced, Larry Nemecek, at this little panel at Phoenix Comic-Con, with, on
Yes.
Memorial Day weekend, announced that CBS and Netflix
could
had
you,
made a
Larry?
deal for a new series.
With
Yeah.
Kayla, on more than one occasion, we've had to like find an article and like that doesn't sound right. And then you'd go do some fact checking, like, oh, you left out 4 words that totally changes the meaning of it.
Yeah.
So we would contact somebody who was at the event and then change it, and then like, oh, here's the correct article. And it was almost like oh, you ruined it for us. But it was like,
So yeah,
no, we just
whenever
fixed
you're
it.
starting to get bored, you just go through your hate mail.
I really am starting to see the rise of like alt-right genre writing. It's like take a topic, especially like with Discovery in the last year, and like there's one writer, it's either her or it's her editor making her do it, it's like whatever's going on, find the most negative thing, and it's like a major website. It's not Starfleet Intelligence Blogger. It's a major website, and it's what your question a while ago about finding things to keep going. Everybody here has mentioned kind of a micro case. Yeah, a micro case of what basically is. I'll be sitting there whether I'm looking for it or it hits me. If I'm looking at Facebook or Twitter, and there's a news. Not only is there news comes out, but then you have about 1/4 of the internet reacts in a. It's like really. Really, people? And I think, well, there's some one-off reaction. And then I see that 10% of Twitter or 10% of Facebook is, that's what's amazed me, is some of that, how in the hell did you come up with that angle on that? Really, that's what your take is? The things that people find who are supposedly fans, that's their angle.
That's the problem.
Yeah, and we've all...
When they announced the new Doctor, when people was like, welcome to the last year and a half of our lives, of everybody just freaking out about everything. So
Trekkies do that best. On the one hand, you gotta love Trekkies for nitpicking everything. Why do you think we have a million different Star Trek podcasts where we can talk about some random species in 5 minutes of the animated series?
Yeah, exactly.
That exists because Trekkies are nitpickers. So on the one hand, you don't want to take that away.
And that's part of the 51 years.
So that's part of its greatness, even though it's a complete pain in the ass. It's also part of the greatness of Trek, right?
But understand that because when you watched the exact same episode I did, you came away with something different.
Completely different.
That doesn't invalidate your experience, right?
IDIC,
it's okay
guys, come on.
that I didn't like this and you loved it. That's all right.
Yeah.
Totally.
And dare I say, reflects back on the Shakespeareanness of Trek, where people come in with different life experiences and it speaks to them in different ways, which is universality. Yes. So I want to take, I know we've got so many more at the mic. Was that I'll do a question or, okay. But anyway, there you go. Thanks for doing that, though. I know you just came down and improv that, but it was very, very fun.
No, I genuinely wanted to.
Well, I wanted to take a moment here. I was kidding earlier on. John and I have a little news announcement here. I said at the beginning, I said 6-8 years ago, when podcasting first became a thing, and when Chris Jones approached me to start coming on Trek FM as well as a lot of other places, whether I should be doing my own. And I thought, no, unless I can there's so many people, and again, I didn't want to be same-o, and there are so many good podcasts out there, and I wanted to do something that had its own unique niche, even in the delivery of things. And I said, I'll just go promote myself and promote everybody else's work and do that. And then I broke in with Portal 47, and now I'm doing my Trekland Tuesdays live, so I have 10 minutes to be live on camera. And then I do a lot of interviewing for our members in Portal 47, which is behind a paywall. But I do that and get there. And then my camera interviews, where I'm barely on camera, but we're talking to a guest on my Switching to Visual YouTube channel. But that's all ending now, because I got made an offer by Rod Roddenberry and John that I could not refuse. So today, I guess at the 11:30 or whatever, 1:30 panel,
at the Roddenberry panel,
I'm actually going to host a podcast. Very limited scope, something that's never been done before. We're going where no documents have gone before.
An even deeper dive.
Deeper dive.
So let's preface this by saying that in Rod's inimitable way, he gets an idea. It's like, go do this now. So that's how this came about. Because there are these boxes that have shown up relatively recently. Roddenberry has these storage units kind of all over the place, and they're trying to...
Storage compartments?
Yeah, just trying to get rid of stuff and keep the stuff that needs to be kept. And some new boxes have shown up, and what are we going to do with all this? Well, Larry came by one day, and we started looking at things. I guess I should go ahead and say a little bit of what this is, because I didn't talk about it at
This is your moment. We have like a couple of minutes.
Yeah. So part of what has been unearthed is this box of stuff from Planet of the Titans.
Ring any bells here?
Yeah. The God Thing.
The God Thing?
Philip Kaufman's script for Star Trek. Just stuff that really hasn't seen the light of day. And one of my favorites, I don't know if you put it in the slideshow, but you took a picture of a document with, in big letters, it's on like a legal pad written in pencil, aha! And we think it might be Gene's writing. We're not really sure.
There's somebody in a story meeting.
So you found all the stuff I've been looking for.
Well, yeah. But, and here's the bizarre part of it, though. Like, it is completely out of order, and we're trying to put it together in a timeline that makes sense. So one of the things that Rod asked us to do was every episode, we're talking about 15 minutes, just to focus on a paragraph or a page or a piece of a document, that we label it with as much information as we can about the year, who it's from, who it's to, the context. So then hopefully you can go back through the podcast and sort of build a timeline of what was happening. And this will cover everything. This
not just the 70s time, but there we go.
Yeah, this is from early Star Trek to new Star Trek.
Yep. So I'm going to revise our little logo board there and add in the Trek files. And this is starting, we're saying, early September.
Soon.
Yes, soon.
Soon. We like soon.
Yeah. This fall soon. So guys, I appreciate that. Before get away, I think everybody else is going to be around and about all this weekend. I do have another panel tomorrow night at 8, my regular annual solo Trekland thing. Just letting you know, if you hit any of us up out here when we get off stage today, but I'm running a special for Portal 47 where we deep dive. It's like a mini-con every week, wherever your center seat is, where no Savvy fan's gone before. So we do a lot of dot connecting, and that's what I'm going to bring part of that to this incredible document stash that Roddenberry's got more of than anybody else. So anyway, if you're interested in that, I hope to see you tomorrow night or around. There's an incredible weekend for Star Trek going on this week. CBS came by at the last second after I recorded a lot of podcasts last weekend talking about how, let's see what happens. And everybody just have a great weekend. It's just going to be a really good... The last couple of years have been the biggest Star Trek years. Star Trek missed the Hall H phenomenon, and it's finally the last couple of years starting to come around. So anyway, thank you all for coming out today and asking questions.
Yes.
Anyway, thanks a lot. And thanks to the panel here. And we have to get a picture before everybody gets away.
All right. Being on an actual panel at San Diego Comic-Con isn't the only thing we've been doing at Trek FM this week, but it is the coolest. I mean, here's a listen to some of the things you may have missed elsewhere on the network.
Previously on Trek.fm, Saturday Morning Trek.
This episode is the only Star Trek that they used to only watch with me. Like, they had no interest in Star Trek except for this episode. If I said Star Trek, they'd say, Tribbles! Oh, let's watch that Tribbles where they get real big and sits in Kirk's chair. They saw the live-action one. They didn't, they kind of liked it, but they always went to the animated one.
Standard Orbit.
I was really hoping that Quinto would have a tie-in to, when the Hobbit trilogy came out, a few years ago. I was like, oh, they might tie into that, and Quinto can have a remix of the Ballad of Bilbo Baggins. They didn't quite go there, did they? So
no, they did not. They did not. But, there are certain things that you can, I guess, mirror or remake. That is not something that should ever be remade.
The 602 Club.
As I mentioned previously, completely blind, and not having known this history about him wanting to do a Tolkien-like world, I didn't get that at all. That's just nope.
And introducing The Edge, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
What have you done out there on the edge of Federation space?
Welcome to The Edge, Trek FM's brand new podcast where we dive into the final frontier of the newest Star Trek series, Star Trek Discovery, the first Star Trek series to be on air in 12 and a half years, something like that.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So check out the shows and get in on the Daily Trek Talk. You'll find them at iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, and the Windows Podcast Directory for Xbox and Zune. You can visit our website at trek.fm and view our podcast directory and stream all of our shows right from the website. We'd also like to invite you to leave us a rating and review on iTunes. Not only does it help us know how we're doing, it also helps other people find the show. Before we go, I'd like to thank our patrons, Norm Lau, Eric Extreme, and Ju Kim. Thank you for your support. And if you want to become an associate producer of a Trek FM show, all you need to do is become a patron of the network at the $25 or more level. Go to patreon.com/trekfm and find out how you can become part of the team. That's patreon.com/trekfm. Again, I want to thank Larry Nemecek for having us all on his panel. It was a great time, and afterwards, I met a great group of Star Trek improvisers. If you're in the LA area, check out the Improvised Generation. They create fully improvised 45-minute episodes in the style of Star Trek The Next Generation. It's comedic, like most improvised shows, but it can also be really thoughtful and touching. And this Sunday, Larry Nemecek and the Improvised Generation are joining forces to bring you a night with Andrea Kindred, the production secretary for TOS's Gene L. Kuhn. Not only did she work on Star Trek, she's an African-American civil rights activist who worked with Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. Come on out and listen to her stories, and then watch a fully improvised story by the Improvised Generation. Go to facebook.com/The Improvised Generation for more details. Well, I think that about wraps it up for our second Saturday Morning Trek supplemental. Stay groovy.
Danny, sounds like you've accidentally invented a thermochemical energy source.
A scientific wonder becomes a nightmare.
Someone's walking around with enough explosive to turn the city into a pancake.
A power that could mark the beginning of the end for the $6 Million Man.
I mean, why do you think we have a million different Star Trek podcasts where we can talk about some random species in
51 years
5
going.
minutes of the animated series?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like, that exists because Trekkies are nitpickers